In the previous short lecture about posters, we discussed some of the differences between posters, talks, and presentations. But to illustrate those, I want to go quickly through two example posters. Those were prepared by graduate students in my experiment, CMS, at the Large Hadron Collider. And I will use those two examples to come back to some of the points that I made in the previous lecture. So let's first have a quick look at those two posters. So here we have the first example, which is a poster by Apjan, a former Junior Lab TA. And this poster deals with a measurement of the CMS experiment at LHC, namely the discovery of the Higgs boson. And the second example that I have here is another poster on the CMS experiment prepared by my graduate student Dragos Velikanu, who also was a Junior Lab TA previously. And as I said, I want to briefly discuss these two posters. And in my opinion, both of those are sort of fine examples if they were prepared as one of the Junior Lab project posters. Although I think both of them also have some points that could be further improved. So let's go back and look at the posters in a little bit more detail. So here again, first the poster by Arm, and let's first mention the good points. I think it clearly follows the structure that you would normally have for a talk, with an introduction and motivation, an overview of what the physics is, what you want to measure, a picture of the experiment, an explanation of how the analysis is done, and then a presentation of the results and conclusions. So very linear, straightforward presentation in sort of the left and right column, reading first the left column from top to bottom, and then the right column from top to bottom. The other things that are nice, obviously the graphics are nice, the colors are nice. The text is, I would say you should not make the font any smaller than this. A very important point, it has to be legible for somebody who stands sort of 2 meters away from the poster, who might be reading the poster while you explain the content to somebody else. I mean, that person has to be able to read it from a couple of meters away. So this is acceptable, but don't make the font smaller. So these are the good points. The points where I think one could think of being a little bit more creative. As I said, the structure is very linear, following how you would normally lay out a talk. You could try to be a bit more inventive in how you present and link the various elements. You still want to hit all the points, why, how, what are the results, what have we learned, but it doesn't have to be sort of in a strictly linear fashion if you want to be a bit more inventive. And the other point, sort of in terms of the text that is on this poster, I think this is at the lower limit. I think, as I said, one use case for the poster is for somebody to read it, get an idea about the measurement, and then talk to you. And for that, you probably want to have somewhat more text than is on this particular poster. If I think of how this was created, it is probably a relatively literal translation of slides that you would present in a talk into poster form, which is one way to do it, but it's not the most creative way. So let's look at the other poster. And again, it's a poster on an experimental measurement by CMS. I think the good points are the graphics are quite nice. You see the experiment, you see what a collision event in the experiment looks like. It explains the analysis method, explains some of the physics, and it shows the main result plot. Compared to the other poster, the layout is not as linear. You can your eye can wander around on the poster a bit more. On the other hand, there are these arrows to sort of link the different parts of the poster to each other. I think the attempt here to have sort of a few sidebars where you can look for details that are not the most important ones, but are still interesting, like the one about the trigger in the lower left, in the lower right. I think that's quite interesting. And I think there's enough text here such that you can digest sort of the main points of the poster, looking at it while the poster presenter is talking to somebody else. So I think that's good. What could definitely be improved here is the fact that the text, I think, is at the upper limit of what you want. Again, you definitely don't want to make the font any smaller than that. And I think it would be good to break up the text a little bit more. This is a fairly large monolithic paragraphs, which is a little bit of a deterrent for somebody who might want to read that. So I think if you have that much text, break it up a little bit more, maybe a little bit less text would be good. And the other point of criticism is, while this is a more sort of inventive structure, not as linear as the other poster, it's a little bit too nonlinear, and it is somewhat difficult to find out what really the main results plot on this poster is, and it turns out to be the plot in the middle of the lower left box. But as I said, it's not immediately clear. It's not the conclusion is not highlighted, so I think that needs to be a bit more obvious. But overall, I think both of these posters are good to look at and good to get some idea in terms of how many plots you want to have there, in terms of making sure that you have plots that are attractive to look at. The amount of text that you put on there should be between sort of the lower limit in the first poster and the upper limit in the second poster. The font that you use should not be smaller than the one that is used on either of these two posters. You need to make sure that you have a nice title. So don't just put a one-word description of your experiment there. Make sure that the title really has some meat to it. And then overall, if you sort of interpolate between these two and think a little bit about what structure you want to have, I think should be no problem to make an exciting poster out of the results from your exploratory experiment.